Historical profiles, George Pickens, and how to value in cost in making a declaration on a player. That and more this week on the Footballguys Dynasty Show. Jordan, here we are. It was a little preamble last week talking George Pickens. We said it could be a whole show. You had to remind me 24 hours ago that we actually were doing George Pickens as an entire show. That actually happened. So here we are. And again, this is where we can focus sometimes tractor beam, laser beam style on a certain topic in the offseason. Week 11, it'd be a little difficult. But here we are, George Pickens, representative of many things discussed in Dynasty strategy.
Yeah, it's funny because I think one of my favorite parts of the offseason is looking at player profiles, trying to study player profiles and learning from them. And George Pickens is a good one. You can kind of go through the start of his career, right, entering into the draft up through now, kind of track some of his dynasty value and see, is that a profile that makes sense for the way it's valued, or is it overvalued, undervalued, and the like there. So I think he's a good lens. And you get some of these players at certain times. Kenny Galladay was one for us. Like, different players you'll learn from different things in terms of how they go, and it's a lesson to learn going into the future.
Absolutely. So we're starting back near the beginning of where we were. So he goes through his Georgia career, and he was basically someone, he's going to fall in the draft because of off-field issues. He would be a first-round talent. And we mentioned that with Joe Mixon and other players where, guess what? You didn't go in the first round. That's one of the big points here is the whole off-field, he's a round one talent. Well, you don't get the round one pedigree. You don't get the round one allegiance. And wide receiver, I go back to this every offseason. I've mentioned it probably 10 times. Wide receiver is really a fine line. If you go round one, we care. If you go beyond round one, it gets a slippery slope environment for A, rookie draft investment. B, you got to be really picky about the profiles. And C, even then, it's very, very risky. So Pickens did not go in round one. Now, he was, in terms of my projection model, he was the best profile, highest score of any non-round one wide receiver of last year's class. I was in on George Pickens. I drafted him plenty in the late first. I liked him. So we're going through with that prism. We go post NFL draft. Where was he in terms of dynasty values? Right around wide receiver 40 or so last offseason. Palatable. You see a lot of rookies and somewhere in the wide receiver 30 to 60 range. It's the upside bucket. There's a lot of veterans that are sliding into that range. And you know what? The veterans likely outproduce the rookies, when you look at the next couple of years, but everyone wants the 21, 22-year-old that you squint ahead and one or two of them become something, but the rest of them became largely nothing. So George Pickens had, I think, a lot of people, and here's maybe the big divide. I think a lot of people assume he had a great, good plus, something in the big time success track year one. I don't think that. So that's one of the big dividing lines here. I actually was a little disappointed in what he did in year one. And so getting up to present day, we can get into the future cast as well in a moment here. But so he was affordable at wide receiver 40. He was a late first round pick. I just traded him away, Jordan, for 105. So, and I'm still starting to do the math, and I'm like, well, I'm going to get a top 40-ish running back, or I'm going to get, a first round wide receiver pretty much guaranteed. So upticking in terms of profile. And again, I like him, but there's a lot of situational factors. We're going to go into some historical data as well for saying it's all a matter of cost. He's not sitting today at wide receiver 40, 45, 50. And in many of these places that you're going to look for market value, they have not put in the bushel basket of new wide receivers every single year that come in and churn down players in this exact zone, because they're going to move down a few spots with the new crop that are going to have higher pedigree than George Pickens. So the pre-draft profile, liked him, highly productive, 21.5 years old, 6'3", worked out well. You like all these things. And then he comes in and he was somewhere, I have him in the wide receiver 50 to 55 range of year one and adjusted points per game. And that's not really a success track. So I could go on for another 10 minutes. Both of us, Jordan, could do a solo show on this. And maybe we have already in our relative portfolio so far this year. But George Pickens, now getting closer to present day, is one where the cost is up and he didn't really justify that with what he did year one.
Yeah, and so I think it's really interesting because you were above where I was coming into the draft. It's not that I didn't like him. I just am sort of indifferent to day two wide receivers. Sort of as a, I'll just take kind of the last one is really my strategy of like round two guys. So that's more of my strategy. You were more in on him. I think he was more of one of your bullish players. And then so that's where we came from. I was sort of indifferent. You were, I would say, aggressive on the market over him. You had multiple X of what you would expect. Then you have to come in and sort of look at this and see what he did relative to, what his profile is now, right? You have to update it. 52 catches, 801 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Sort of on a surface level, that actually looks decent. But when you go a little bit further, you have to have some very critical questions to ask about it. 9.7 points per game. Overall, he ranked 40th in points. In points per game, he actually ranked 52nd. Okay, so right around that, like that's a key kind of threshold of progression going forward. When you start going a little bit further, he had 84 targets this year, according to PFF, on 580 routes, according to PFF. Those are the second most routes in the league, behind for rookies, behind only Garrett Wilson. So there's a lot of sample size there, right? You're not looking at a small sample size of a player like Jameson Williams or something like that that was hurt or banged up or whatever. Like he had a full sample of a season to look at. His ADOT, for example, his average depth of target was actually the highest of this rookie class at 15.4. But in basically everything else, he's pretty lackluster. Yards per route run, he had 1.38. That's well below the historical average of second round wide receivers, which is actually a 1.48. His targets per route run is at 14%, which means for every 100 routes he runs, he's targeted 14 times, right? 14% of those routes he's targeted on. And that's, again, well below the average for a round two rookie wide receiver. A couple of the other things that I really look at in terms of try to gauge how he did, he was a huge participant, right? He participated in 90% of their routes, right? 90% of their dropbacks, he was running a route on. So this isn't a player that's a part-time player. This is a player that's fully involved. And when you look at like his target share and other things like that, fell below London, Wilson, and Olave, right? So there's key, he was playing and had the highest route participation of any rookie wide receiver this year and fell behind those guys by pretty substantial margins. So you look at all of those sort of metrics and say, okay, well, all of those things kind of fall below what the average I would hope for or expect for a day two, specifically a second round wide receiver. I've also dug up some other things on him that I think shed new light really in terms of how I think about the position. If you look at, for example, his, I think the big thing that people will hearken back to and say, here's why he's so valuable. It's a lot of the glitz and glamour stuff, right? He had the highest contested catch rate for wide receivers with more than 80 targets this year. He caught 68% of them. That's better than Marvin Jones was at 67%, 65% for Terry McLaurin, 65% for Mike Evans, and 65% for Marquise Brown, right? So way up there in those. And frankly, those look good, right? So that's one of the things that's imprinted on our mind is, hey, there's these highlight plays that are really imprinted with us. The problem with George Pickens is a third of his targets were contested targets, right? Which is very, very concerning in terms of when you take out those contested targets, right? So you take out the contested targets and then you sort of reevaluate what he did on what I call an open route run, right? It's a route where you were not targeted on a contested target. How often are you targeted on those routes? Only 10.6% of the time. Right, that's a bottom 5 percentile type outcome. And there's a couple of key things. Why is that important? Well, number one, contested catch rate is highly variant from year to year. One season's success does not predict the other season's success. It's almost completely random. It predicts about 2% of next year's performance, right? So
unless you're Mike Evans, right?
Unless you're Mike Evans, but you start to see that in more.
There's still a high variance, right?
It's very high variance. Just one person's hand being in a different spot, right? That can really influence it. Again, these are small sample sizes too, so you got to be really careful on that. So it's highly variant from year to year. So what you find with him is he's basically at the top of, right? So that's non-predictive from year to year. What's really predictive from year to year is your targets per route run. That's very sticky. right? So that predicts about 45% or so of what you would expect next year's targets per route run to be, right? What's the most important thing to driving fantasy success at the wide receiver position is getting targets, okay? And so the thing that he is good at is the thing you can't depend on from year to year. The thing that George Pickens is bad at so far, which is drawing targets on his routes, which is a skill and not a scheme and not any of that other stuff. That is a skill that's derived from a wide receiver, especially on the extremes. That stuff he's not good at. And so that's the stuff that's really predictive of future success, as opposed to some of the contested catch stuff, which people really dig, but is not predictive of future success. So you got to be really careful, right? I think with him, the key thing to think about is he is at the height of, people are embracing sort of the high end of his variance, and investing at him at the high end of his variance, where there's a lot of floor, right? There's a lot of floor below him that he can have a pretty significant fall if some of the breaks stop going his way. And and he doesn't really mature and grow in these other areas that are frankly a lot harder to grow at.
Yeah, a couple historical things, and I'll kind of spin it to where we sit today. Is looking at round 2 wide receivers, hyper risky. And if you didn't finish in the top 24 in year 1, the odds that you finish in the top 24 year 2 and beyond, 25%. So you're talking about a 1 in 4 bet. And like you said, I think a lot of people stick with these memes and these snapshots of him making incredible catches. It didn't produce a lot of touchdowns. It did not produce a lot of fantasy points. So what does it mean? Mm-hmm. Because, are you building, this is almost like, what is it? Flashy roster,
bikini season, Dynasty bikini season.
It's bikini season, because again, you see George Pickens, you're like, man, that guy flashed big time. Well, it didn't equate to a lot. The whole point is he was a player that maybe you streamed if you were in a tight spot with injuries or buys, right? I mean, that's kind of the end game of what he was in year 1. He was a bit player. He had 3 lines in a play. You're like, well, he made the audience laugh. Great. Mm-hmm. He was still seventh on the billing, and it was basically a 9 person cast. It just was not a big thing there. And here's the big thing. So let's say what his cost is now. It's in the mid 20s. We actually had someone in the chat that said he went in a startup draft at wide receiver 13. He is all over the map. So this is not alone. We've seen people that said he is a top 12 dynasty wide receiver or top 20. If we want to say something middle ground, wide receiver 25 or so. And that's an uptick significantly from last year. And Adam Harstead always talks about when you're above or below redraft versus dynasty, all this stuff. He's not going to be wide receiver 25 in redraft. So
he's wide receiver 35 at present in terms of some of the best ball stuff that's starting already. He's wide receiver 35.
So firmly ahead. Now, here's my biggest problem. Let's talk about construct of an NFL offense. Jordan gave a lot of micro information in terms of how he's used and how it's concerning and what he's good at versus what he's not good at. I wanted to just go in. Let's talk Pittsburgh Steelers passing game. Kenny Pickett did enough to be dangerous and not good. He did enough that the Steelers probably aren't addressing the position this year. So you have a faded in the draft, didn't go top half round 1, which is a concerning threshold, and not good in year 1. You have Deontay Johnson, who is the actual wide receiver 1 for the team. So let's view this construct. Let's say that Kenny Pickett is not a top half NFL quarterback. That is not an outlandish statement for 2023. That should be the expectation, not a top half, not top 16. Hard to get in there. You could say finishing in the mid 20s should be easier than than quarterback 32, because there's a lot of crap. But Pickett is going probably to struggle. And then you say Deontay Johnson is the wide receiver 1 of that team. George Pickens is wide receiver 2. Historically speaking, if we're talking about a bottom half team, even something that's in the QB 17 to 24 range, I call that tier 3. The number 2 wide receiver has only a 16% chance of finishing in the top 36. Jordan, how nutty is it to value someone at wide receiver 25 if I were to tell you they have not finished in the top 25 yet, and they only have a 16% historical chance this year, the first 12 months you roster that player going forward, of finishing even in the top 36? That is a dynamite, light your dynasty roster spot on fire situation.
100%. And it's just one of those things where, the and I don't know about you, like we've gotten away from a lot of the younger wide receivers, and honestly, like the past couple of years haven't been great in terms of that. Like it hasn't been a great, for our strategy of kind of avoiding paying high prices for incoming rookies. Like they've been pretty good, right? So, and still, we're way ahead. And why is that in terms of success, in terms of team building? Because these guys can't make you pay. Right, being wrong on George Pickens, right, erring on the I need to see it side of George Pickens, of any of these young wide receivers. Wide receiver isn't a position outside of a thermonuclear Cooper Cup type season, one of those type seasons, that makes a huge difference in terms of like winning and losing. Right. Especially when you're in like a super flex format, especially when you get some other premiums going and bigger rosters, right? It's just really hard outside of a handful of guys in any given year to really move the needle. And as a result of that, right, even a mid wide receiver 1 type finish, right? That's not that far away from a wide receiver 18 finish, right? That's not that consequential. And so one of the things you see when you're trying to build effective rosters is don't fall into the trap of like, oh, all these guys are elite, right? People way overuse the phrase elite. I saw alpha playmaker, alpha number 1 wide receiver, huge playmaker, describing George Pickens. What's he doing on the other 86% of his routes that he's not targeted on? That's just my question.
Okay, and one of my final points is going to be he needs one of two things to happen in a graphic way. He needs to pass Deontay Johnson, who has been a target hog, and he's mid-career. He knows the nuances of the position. He gets open. He doesn't rely on contested catches, which you already said. Converting those, tough to do year over year. And so
it's a small sample too.
And it's a trust fall, right? The contested vertical throw is a trust throw between quarterback and wide receiver. And how often are they going to get it?
Right.
Because we don't even see the goal line fade anymore. 4 touchdowns for a vertical guy. He's not a yards after catch guy either.
Right.
So he's almost got to be standing in the end zone.
Right.
So anyway, so he either needs to pass Deontay Johnson in a firm way. Go sit over there. You're now the number 2 guy. Or Kenny Pickett needs to become elite. Not in 2025 now. Because that is the other way that the 2 wide receivers in an offense matter. If you're not too like, oh my gosh, like in my opinion, Tua was dragged to success because he had Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. They're really good. So that really helps the quarterback elevate. And it ran through 2 wide receivers. Is Pittsburgh going to run through 2 wide receivers and have a top 8, 10, 12 quarterback? Pat Freiermuth is there. We have Najee Harris. Right. Yeah, right. Yeah. And so they aren't going away for how they can catch the ball relative to their position. And a Kenny Pickett is not, quarterback is easier to project what's happening. We have more data points. We have hundreds and hundreds of throws as a sample size, even early in their career. And so to project him as a breakout star, a la Trevor Lawrence from 2021 to 2022, and Pickett being that sort of iteration for this year, it's a tough sell. So that's probably not going to happen. Deontay Johnson has already had a number of seasons better than George Pickens probably will ever have. And you're saying he's going to pass him as a vertical contested catch guy over someone that plays all over the formation, gets open, and is a target hog. That transition is just going to happen in 2023. One of those 2 things has to happen. That's really all there is to it. And he's probably, and the biggest thing we'll say, my biggest closing thing is this is not specifically George Pickens can't play. He's horrible. And I think, if you mention something about George Pickens on Twitter, that's what people think you're saying. Mm-hmm. We wouldn't be saying any of this if he was wide receiver 50 in cost. Correct?
Correct.
It's because he's going over overt profiles that are better, more insulated, and or have more upside. It's crazy time. And again, I feel like if just Jordan was recording this show, because like you said, you were more tepid on him. I think me being here and being on the same page is important because rewind the tape. I talked about George Pickens February, March, April last year, plenty. and I like the profile. I have plenty of them, but guess what I'm doing? I'm shopping. The price is up. I have the chance to get picks or, go 2-for-1s, upgrade at the position. But these picks are going to turn into round 1 wide receivers instead of a round 2 guy, and a pick that is insulated to where I can pick and choose. What do these depth charts look like? Are they going to a Deontay Johnson type situation? Do they have that year 1 data point that isn't? Again, a lot of these guys break out early. And here are just some of the names. If I'm looking at similar year 1s in terms of where they finished, to be strong dynasty and fantasy producers. Greg Jennings from round 2, these are all round 2 guys, had elite quarterback play, bar none. Jarvis Landry won from the slot and was a target hog, and he broke out at wide receiver 16 in year 2. DK Metcalf is an alien. So that is not a peer. Josh Gordon went on in year 2. He had alpha traits, and he went on to have, he was the clear wide receiver 1 for that Browns team. I think it was Derek Anderson. Sidney Rice is the one I will squint and say that may be the most like George Pickens. But he was hurt a lot. He had 1 magical year and went off into dust. Christian Kirk. If you had a Christian Kirk outcome the next 4 years from George Pickens, is that a win? For his cost, and the time value, it pretty much took till this year, and then he was like a top 30 was his peak of just like, what does that matter? Over there in Arizona. To me, that's the thing that keeps hooking you in, but you got to exit. You got to get out of there.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the biggest success stories from this type of year 1 profile. I didn't hear a lot of symmetry to George Pickens here. So, and those are, again, similar year 1, same pedigree, same finishes, same promise for a lot of these guys. But for every one of those, you get Laviska Shenault, you get a George Pickens, you get an Aaron Dobson, you get Greg Little, if you remember that. There's a bunch of guys. Rondell Moore, checks watch, we're still waiting. So there's so many recent whiffs, and it's just not a high percentage play. Do you have final thoughts on this and just about wide receivers? Like you say, it's round 1, and then you're like, I really don't care that much.
Yeah. I think when you test your beliefs against the data, right? And I think that one of the things that I would constantly think about is, tape analysis without analytics or without a look at data is just as flawed as data analysis without any look at tape, right? I think you could just sort of blind yourself into it. And again, if you watch 580 routes from Pickens, you're going to come away impressed, but that doesn't leave you with any sort of comparison point if you haven't watched a lot of other players. I think, again, I've talked about, I think he's closer to he's ahead of Alec Pierce, but I think he's closer to Alec Pierce than he is the elites of the position, right? And that's not a knock on Alec Pierce. It's just their profiles look a lot the same.
They're in the bucket of upside. You could see something positive happening, and they're largely secondary guys on their own depth chart. And where does that leave you? It leaves you in this giant mass of middle, younger tier wide receivers that have some pedigree, but probably not enough, and they probably don't become alpha wide receivers.
Yeah. The other thing I heard today, which was actually it was actually the best statistical point that someone has given me with regards to George Pickens. And it was basically, if you take his yards and basically his targets, he had the most yards per target. He basically, I think if day 2 wide receivers was the test, he ranked only behind AJ Brown and Deebo Samuel in terms of like yards per target. The problem with that is when you look at what they did versus what he did, right? And it's not yards per target that drives it. It's how often you're targeted, right? If you're catching 1 deep ball a game for 50 yards, but your team is running 60 passing plays, right? That's not a good outcome. And so when you when you compare a guy like Pickens to a guy like AJ Brown, who had literally almost double the yards per route run that George Pickens had this year. As a rookie, AJ Brown was 2.67. As a rookie this season, George Pickens was 1.38. Deebo Samuel, 2.04. Right? When you look at the percentage of the routes that they were targeted on, literally 50% more. They were AJ Brown was targeted on 21% of the routes that he ran, and Deebo was targeted on 20% of the routes that he ran.
You need the ball.
Huge difference, right? You have to be throwing the ball. Being yards per target doesn't matter if you're not throwing the ball that much.
This is
right?
like a running
And
back
the
that's going to see
problem with
10 carries a game. It's tough to live. 10 carries a game and 2
Exactly.
targets. You cannot. I mean, we said this with, I mean, Jamal Charles was like the one in our, you know, like our general fantasy lifeline that was
Yep.
for a few years, get this guy the ball. He eventually became a workhorse, but it was pulling teeth. He was a committee guy and he was a highly efficient player, but he was on like a Barry Sanders type level of efficiency per carry and all this stuff. But I mean, again, think of it like a running back that's in this frustrating committee that's not getting enough touches. Where do you sit with that? Something needs to change. There needs to be an injury to the other guy, or they have to surpass somebody. And that's what we sit with Pickens. He's almost like a committee wide receiver.
Yep.
He needs Deontay Johnson out of the way. He needs a better situation, higher level quarterback, or just said he needs the ball. So it's weird to talk about 10 different numbers, but on the flip side of it, you can also discuss that the situation is just not conducive. You can talk about it in a macro sense as well. So yeah, and again, it all is driven by cost. That is all the name. I mean, he's rising, and again, we need to add the rookies in. How many are going to go ahead of him? I mean, people drafting him in the teens in a startup draft. There's so many other ways to go. So many other ways to go. All right, This is episode 140 of the Football Guys Dynasty Parsons, Jordan McNamara. We've got an exciting announcement, new off-season edition, and that's the Football Guys 2023 Rookie Draft Guide. It is here, the 1.0 version, and it will help you identify the players you need to dominate your in-depth statistics, ranking, analysis, 120 NFL prospects. We will help you discover the sleepers and stars of the class, help you gain that edge to win your leagues. The first edition is here and available now. It's 100% free. All you got to do is sign up over there at footballguys.com/rookie guide. You get to download all 120 plus pages of that first edition now. It's 100% free, as I mentioned. You get a big board cheat sheet, super flex, one quarterback. And if you're an elite or Hall of Fame subscriber, you're going to get the update post combine and post NFL draft editions, updated statistics, additional analysis, draft strategies, athletic scores, and more. Head over to footballguys.com/rookie guide to get your free rookie draft guide and start dominating your dynasty league. Jordan, we got a fun game in our Dynasty Trades segment here because we've got 2 stud quarterbacks. We got a Mahomes deal. We've got a Josh Allen deal. We're going to play round 29 of Did They Get Enough? And we actually should be keeping a ledger, called a scroll. We should unscroll it and keep track over the years. And so we've got a couple of big boy deals. So did they get enough and how close were they are the discussion points at play. First one here, Russell Wilson, who I was interested. I'll tell anyone that wants to listen. We got a Football Guys staff startup mock draft going on right now. I was surprised post Sean Payton, Russell Wilson still going in round 4. I think that's a real saucy bounce back opportunity there as your QB2 there, even if you didn't go super early on your QB2. Nice backstop plan there in Russell Wilson. So we got Russell Wilson, DJ Moore, Kenneth Walker, and 103. That's a lot of stuff, Jordan. 4, Patrick Mahomes, and some additional things that really don't matter. So what are your thoughts? That's a 4. All right. Didn't even get to do the dramatic music lead up at all. All right.
Mahomes.
Okay. So break this down. Those are 4 good pieces. Normally we don't see a trade with 4 good pieces. It might be 1 or 2. It might be 1 and a bunch of stuff that doesn't matter. So how close is this?
So, I mean, I like DJ Moore. The problem with DJ Moore, there's like 15 guys that are close to him in terms of like what they could do production wise. I actually think he's due for a big bounce back this year. There's some metrics that I'm actually working on for an article for the site. I like DJ Moore, but he's not going to move the needle for you. 103, you're basically trying to draft another quarterback, right? I would think probably you're looking there at maybe quarterback 1 or 2 in this class, right? And then you got Kenneth Walker, who again we like. I'm not sure if he's got running back 1 overall in his range of outcomes, right? I think a Nick Chubb type trajectory would be a pretty good outcome for him. And I don't know if he's ever going to sort of win you a league, but can be a part of why you win, right? And you get Russell Wilson, who I think one of the big things that people do wrong when they do dynasty trades is they sell the best player while trying to buy low. And this is what you're doing with both DJ Moore and Russell Wilson. You are selling the best player, who's Mahomes, and trying to buy low on Russell Wilson. And if you are not right, it's catastrophic. So this is how you put together a deal like this, throw all the pieces, right? I have a similar offer that I can put together in a league that I'm going to be motivated to do once we get off this show. So we got to wrap this thing, Chad, before this gains mainstream acceptance here. We got to wrap this show. Got to go. I got to get this out. But yeah, no, Mahomes just changes your world, and no one on the other side does. And I think that's the big thing.
Yeah, and the risk, again, what you need is you need DJ Moore at some point to have a career year, or you need Kenneth Walker to kind of over his skis in terms of producing at his profile. Because you mentioned Nick Chubb, and I think it's very apt. Like, the receiving upside is probably not big with Kenneth Walker, how he's currently projecting. So is he going to be I mean, I mentioned it in terms of the high leverage opportunity scores and all this. Like, Kenneth Walker, I was like, you are on this heater that is the only guys that have really done it are Nick Chubb and Derrick Henry, of overproducing beyond their opportunities, efficiency, and being optimized within their offense. And I don't know, it's a tough benchmark historically to kind of join that group, because those are two aliens, and Kenneth Walker doesn't really seem like an alien. It just seems like he got some good fortune breaking some longer touchdowns. And so you need DJ Moore, and you either need 103 to fall in your lap. Like, the 101 quarterback probably isn't going there. Bijan Robinson probably isn't going there. So you're like, well, I have somebody else, whoever else. And it's just the range of outcomes. Again, even if all these are doubles, I think it's tough to get to home run status, right? And Russell Wilson, what if he doesn't bounce back? I think he's a great candidate to do so. But when you talk about Superflex and you don't get back a quarterback, let's say for Mahomes, and DJ Moore doesn't have a top 8-10 season in him, period, going forward, it's really tough to pull even in the same neighborhood. And here's the other part. How about we just look at age, right? Russell Wilson's probably going to be out of the NFL when Mahomes is Russell Wilson's age.
Right. He's on his 10th consecutive AFC championship trip.
Yeah.
Right?
So I mean, Kenneth Walker is probably going to be out of the league before Patrick Mahomes. So just, you start putting these puzzle pieces together. And when you say, okay, dominant seasons, let's start counting the other 4 guys versus Mahomes. Anyway, and it's concentrated to one roster spot. So the more I talk about it, the more, yes, it's Patrick Mahomes. And yes, Jordan answered as quickly as it probably took for analysis. You probably just waited, and I don't know how high of a quarterback it would need to be in this deal, because you're not getting a Herbert, for example. If it was a Dak Prescott, that's a better profile. But again, it's tough. And for the record, this is a team that already had Dak, and now they have Mahomes and Dak, and golf clap for you. So moving in the right direction. All right, we got another one here. Josh,
that's a walking playoff berth, by the way. Like, that's you roll into the season.
Good luck. Well, the worst case outcome is you go into the final week and you lose and you miss the playoffs.
Right.
Pretty much.
Right.
All right. This team, now this is for Josh Allen and a 24-second. So not only did they get Josh Allen, but they squeezed a second out of this. So here's what they gave to get Josh Allen plus. Matthew Stafford. So we can probably stop the conversation right now, because the quarterback is even shakier than Russell Wilson. Matthew Stafford, Justin Jefferson, Brian Robinson, and 110.
So I like Stafford, but again, same problem with Wilson, right? You're betting at, you're buying low on the league side, on the other side, right? So that's the one problem. And again, this one you have what I would consider an elite piece coming back, right? You have Justin Jefferson, so that's an elite piece. Again, the problem is it's not even he, right? He can produce multiple wide receiver one overall finishes for the next 3 years. And that's not going to make the same difference as a guy like Josh Allen is, right? And again, the difference between, very good wide receiver and Justin Jefferson is pretty big. The difference between good or very good quarterback and Josh Allen is bigger, right? And so when you start looking at that, right, that's the problem. Again, then you have Brian Robinson. Like, think of how poorly this deal can go for you. You got Justin Jefferson, who sort of settles in as a high-end wide receiver one. Stafford never bounces back. Brian Robinson's loitering in a committee for the rest of his year. You miss on a whatever first round wide receiver at 110, and the other person's getting Josh Allen, right? Like that has disaster, right? There's
Josh Allen
disaster.
career altering injury is the one thing that kind of erodes that side.
Yeah, and it's not something I'm particularly worried about.
Right.
So, that's kind of how I
Yeah.
view that, right? Could it happen?
Yeah.
Sure. But if it happens to Justin Jefferson, this is a catastrophe, right? Like
Right.
on the flip side of this, if Justin Jefferson blows out an Achilles, right, in training camp,
Fair.
like
These are the, to
you
be
can't
fair,
win the
Jordan,
deal.
these are the types of deals that get done in a startup draft. So we might be disparaging them
Right.
in an existing league, but let's play this out. Josh Allen, 101, 102, 103, just high first,
Yep.
and Justin Jefferson later first. So let's say you're
Yep.
trying to trade from later first up to high first, whether that's for Mahomes or Josh Allen. And you add Stafford mid rounds, Brian Robinson later than that, 110. I mean, that's a type of deal that could get done. Oh, I'm moving to the late first, and they do this deal.
Absolutely.
Early first and startups are going way too cheap. And it's exploitable in almost every draft. People get in there, they're excited to get quote unquote the haul, and they're not getting the haul. That's the thing. The haul was 5 years ago, and we said this all the time. You could trade it for a second, a third, and a future first. The future first was a big part of that deal. And now people are trading down or out for things like, oh, I'll give you a fourth round pick and a seventh round startup pick, to move down to round 2 or round 3. And people think they're going to be so cute. So cute. And then they gave up one of these cyborgs, and you never get another look at them. You had it. You got the draw of the random draft position, or you did the Kentucky Derby style, or whatever you did to get it. You got it, and then you gave it away. The first decision you made in Dynasty of that league, you gave it away.
Yeah.
So, and it's happening. It's chronic. I bet in most startups you see 101, 102, or 103 traded away.
Yes.
And they're always on the block.
Yeah.
If anything, you should just sit there and go, I'm lucky, you're not, I have it, you don't. Nah. And then you just make the pick.
Right.
It sounds so boring.
It's too cheap. It's too, like 101 is
it's
too,
just way too, it's just way too cheap.
Mahomes and Allen are too expensive. They're too good for 101. Right?
Because what do we do?
Like they're just mind numbing.
Because this similar valuation in an existing league, this is what it looks like. This is on par with what you see in a startup draft traded away.
Right.
So we shouldn't be saying anything differently. And again, the Russell Wilson one, it's a bunch of mid-round stuff, right? 103 is probably what, third round? Does that sound about right?
Right.
Okay. So third round, Kenneth Walker, probably in the same range. DJ Moore out a little bit, but you wouldn't trade, 101 for a third, a fourth, because we just said that with Russell Wilson, and a sixth. It's a lot of pieces. What do you start 15? Like what's the lineup requirements?
Right.
I mean, 3-point passing touchdowns. I don't know. You gotta have some funky stuff going on.
Point per toilet in your house.
But yeah, maybe by midseason he'll get the point. He'll surpass toilets. All right. We got a Bijan Robinson trade. So I thought we needed to include this. 'Tis the season. So we got Bijan Robinson and Michael Thomas traded for Saquon Barkley and DeAndre Swift.
Yeah, so this is kind of along the lines of the discussion we had last week. Yeah, I think it was like 106 and is it Derrick Henry for Bijan Robinson? This feels kind of like that, right? It feels a little bit like that. You're getting a lot older in Barkley. You're getting, I think, something less certain in DeAndre Swift, right? I view this as Michael Thomas is almost a roster filler at this point. Again, I think that's a sound bet to make as a throw-in back. Like that's the right type of bet to make when you're getting a throw-in back. But this is, you have to sort of be right at the top of this deal for it to matter, right? It's clear that Barkley and Swift are the two best, the second, third best players in this deal. To me, I think I would take Bijan Robinson. And the reason I would take him is he's more liquid. Like you harken back to, just harken back to what you said last week, which is when you look at these guys, when you get the full prime, right? When you get the full prime, there's a huge edge there. So I think that's a big one. The other thing too is like, again, you're buying low on Swift and a trade down for the best player in a deal, right? Like you got to be careful about doing that stuff. And Barkley's going into free agency. You have that problem. And if you look at some of his efficiencies, it hasn't really bounced back to the early parts of his career. Like he bounced back some, but not all the way. And so, as he end up being in the Hall of Very Good, where running back one overall isn't really in his range of outcomes? I don't know. We'll see. But like he didn't get there this year, right? He didn't get all the way sort of back up to that level this year. I'd take Bijan Robinson. I'd start the clock anew.
Yeah, this is a critical year for DeAndre Swift. And this is a deal that would look differently if Swift continued on a trajectory or at least avoided the trajectory that he now created in 2022. He's 24. We're still kind of waiting for him. He has almost like a Miles Sanders type profile in the sense of you're looking for the upside and it hasn't really hit. And he showed signs of potentially having that, and it just has not converted. Could it convert this year? Jamal Williams gone. Swift gets a lot of goal line stuff. They backfill with a guy, but they say, DeAndre Swift, you're the guy. This is it. But he's also had some durability issues. Are they really going to trust him with that sort of role? Detroit's a good offense. If you get the running back one and it's a clear-cut depth chart rotation, that has big value. But it's high risk because he's a tough guy to value right now. I have him at running back 15 for in Dynasty just because of age, kind of how he projects, and you're really trying to shoot the needle. The upside is there, but the floor is a little frightening, both from a market value standpoint and then how comfortable are you? I mean, committee stuff this past year, I mean, you would say he's clearly the best guy, and Jamal Williams was just like, no. And Saquon Barkley, 5 full years older than Bijan Robinson.
So a lot of years.
That's a lot. Years. Like you said, getting the whole thing with Barkley, even though he's on a strong trajectory, if he stays healthy, you're looking at 2-3 more probably. Still, Bijan Robinson can get the whole thing. And to be fair, Bijan Robinson, round one pedigree. I know, the days of running backs going in the top 5 or so isn't really going to be much of a thing anymore. But if you look at the profiles of just round one guys, Bijan Robinson has the profile of a Zeke, a Barkley, the big boys that we've seen over the past 10 years or so go very high in the draft. And that's not really today's environment. But there is no bulletproof thing, but a round one running back that doesn't have clear limitations in certain areas is about as close as you can get. So to give that up for an older back and it just feels like between either Barkley has to stay healthy and produce more quality years remaining than you would normally expect out of 26, or we get a giant bounce back from DeAndre Swift that is pretty risky to just say blind faith. I believe that's a tough one. So I think Bijan Robinson is the clear side. And I think it's pretty savvy just to point it out. I mean, to make it a 2 for 2 and go, how about you give me Michael Thomas? Like just an upside shot of a guy that he played last year, not a lot, but he was a guy in your lineup. He basically went right back to the guy that was an autoplay for you and a centerpiece of that offense. May never see it again. Who knows? A lot of variables, but that's the type of guy to pick off of, vulture style off of someone's wide receiver 5, 6, 7. A guy with a profile that I can take that carcass off your roster. Don't worry about it. I'll take Michael Thomas, make it a 2 for 2. We'll walk away. We'll get this deal done. So again, I think it's Bijan Robinson, but I also just wanted to highlight if you're going to make something a 2 for 2 or 3 for 3, just get something of value. Like don't make it somebody's wide receiver 9. Don't make it some random tight end that doesn't matter or someone that you're going to cut. Get your money's worth because poke around, send 3 or 4 different things with a different add-on and see who's ugly because you'll probably get a backup running back you like, a Michael Thomas, by asking, giving them options.
I love that. See who's ugly. We should, if we had to put see who's ugly.
There's that Office one, right? Who's ugly? Yeah. Who's ugly? Like for the Michael Scott Paper Company, they had that cheer every morning. All right, we got one final one. We got a 16-team deal, and I really wanted to see where this dialogue goes. They traded 106 this year and Zach Ertz for a 24 first. They're convinced it's going to be a top 2 or 3 pick. He doesn't need Ertz. And he likes to, some of the commentary here was he likes to gamble on a team stinking. That's how he got 106 was from a previous trade that he did like this. And what are your thoughts on how high you would go with a pick of saying there's certain teams out there that are not well run. And you say, every time trading opens, I try or I want to get their future first when that becomes available. How aggressive would you be to do it in a setting like this or in Dynasty in general, because you need upside shot. If you're a good team, your natural pick is not going to be up in the top 2 or 3. Your only way is via trading like this.
Yeah, I mean, in a 16 team, in a 12 team league, 105 is right about the spot where you treat a future a random first, right? 105 is about the proper valuation of that, because it's not. We've talked about this before, right? The difference between 1 and 2 and 2 and 3 is a lot bigger than the difference between 11 and 12, right? So when you start looking at those, right, it becomes very much like the random shot is worth more because you get
You have
get
a percentage chance at 101 and 102,
Correct.
right?
Correct. You get a random shot at one of the early picks. So in this deal, right, in a 16 team league, like we'll move it back a little bit, right? That's about like 106 would be right about the number that I would expect that random first would be. Right. I haven't run the specific number on it, but that's, I think, a fair proxy for it. You're throwing in Ertz as a depth pick, right? And and then basically getting the first next year. Yeah, and I don't think you're expecting a ton from Ertz. You've got Andrews, right? You can do a lot better than McBride as your backup, but you got Andrews. You're not really worried about Ertz. The problem with this is you look really stupid if it's 114, right? But I understand, like, if you really look at this and say, listen, this could be 102, 103, something like that. I understand that. The only other thing that I would say is, like, can you do better than this with the person you pick at 106 at some point this year? Right. That would be the other thing that I would sort of balance there. So you probably have a better understanding about where that pick is going to be if it's a top 2 or 3 chance. I understand that, especially if you think, hey, this is 106 is an elite this year. I can take a shot at having a future pick that's elite. Maybe I'm tight on roster spots, whatever. I sort of understand all those arguments. I just be careful about making the presumption that this is going to be an early pick, because I think you can really get burned, and we're really bad at that way in advance.
Yeah. And I've had circumstances like, oh man, this is going to be 101, 102, and it ends up being 5 or 6, and that's not even a worst case, because these teams, when they make these trades, they're getting Zach Ertz. It's a 16 teamer, maybe that helps them, and they're getting 106. Like, they're getting someone that can help now, or an asset that can help now through picking a player. And like what you said, who's to say that player doesn't rise? I'm assuming they didn't say. I'm assuming it's not super flex. 16 teamers typically are not. So you are talking straight one quarterback, and I think there's big upside. But like you said, like if you end up with 104 next year, 105, 106, you can just kind of punt it out a year. And I feel like this is a little too high. Like, I think if it's 8, where you're basically fringe playoff, that's where I think you have equity, because you're like, this team is bad. They're not going to make the playoffs. And so that's where I think it just needs to be a little later, because 106, you're looking at, I mean, there's going to be 3, 4, maybe 5 first wide receivers. There's going to be, probably a couple running backs in the top 40, let's say. So you're pretty much at the number already. And, when that comes on the clock, it's also could you trade back? Could you trade for a veteran? Could you trade for, so even if you're a good team, you're like, I don't need 106. I don't need Zach Ertz. All that is fine. But I mean, you're given a team 106 that you think is horrible. Well, what if they do something with 106? I mean, what if they trade down, get a veteran, a player that fits right in their lineup, they fill a hole? What if Zach Ertz? I mean, I'm just playing this out, and you just gave them something that is, I'm not going to say a 24 first isn't sellable, but just they have options now in the near term to get a rise from the combine, the NFL draft, a player sitting at 106 that you thought would be 103 or 104. So I just don't like the projecting part of this, because you gave up such a high pick. If it's
110, it's different.
Typically
right?
Yeah. Like, and honestly, that's the type of deal. Like, I love adding to my list first that I know is, 109 in a 12 team, or 110, 111. And I will add something to it to get that team's first that I'm highly confident will be non-playoff. And it's the same sort of setting like this. It has outs to be very, very high. And I know 111 is a whole different spectrum, I mean, so just, yeah, those are the parts I don't like. It's a bit rich. I get the concept. I approve. I stamp the concept. And I think, again, a lot of times for good teams, good GMs, this is really the only chance you have to get high picks. It's through trading and it's through being proactive, because once this team starts playing and they're 1-4, they're probably not trading that 24 first. So you kind of need to do it on the early side. And you know what? If people know that this team is not very good, someone's going to come trying to do a deal. So I get doing it in January, February, instead of closer to the draft. Man, I mean, 6 is your own pick, and that's all you had. But tough. Tough is what I will say.
Yeah, for sure.
Tough to squeeze out profit. All right, Jordan, you have an exciting announcement here for a big project you have been working on. It is now ready for release, and Footballguys Dynasty audience for the show here needs to know.
Yeah, so my annual Analytics Dynasty Strategy Guide is out. This is the 5.0 edition, Chad. 5 of these. This one's very different in terms of some of the stuff that we're looking at. It's an overall team building guide, right? Sort of from top to bottom on how to do your team. Thanks to Joe, we've partnered up. You can use the promo code FBG for Footballguys. So FBG at analyticsdynasty.com/store. And get 10% off the Dynasty Team Building Guide. The guide has key metrics, and a lot of the ones we used in this show, talking about George Pickens, how to process those decisions, key strategies on team building and stuff, and why we value different players and positions the way that we do. I've got a couple of case studies in there, and some subscribers have even written some stories, which when you read those, like, it's pretty wild about some of the things that they can do. And honestly, it's just making good decisions can just really add up. So that stuff was really heartening. I've also included a 1-page chart. I challenged myself to a 1-page chart of all the things that I sort of believe in. And so I did a chart. It took me forever, right? What's the saying about the more you, sorry, I didn't write a shorter letter. I didn't have enough time. Like, this was the ultimate time commitment. I'm trying to make it all 1 page. So it's all there. Use promo code FBG at analyticsdynasty.com/store to get 10% off. And I'll have the link in the show notes as well for you.
Yeah. Excellent stuff. And yeah, I love it. It's truly hard because you are one that you can go on and on in your chapters. And so a lot of times people want the cliff notes, right? They just tell me the answer. And a lot of times, you know, it's like you almost need a summary, and then you need a summary of the summary, and then you finally need a chart. Like I think it was last year, I came up with a chart of like a hierarchy of how you should be looking at things in rookie drafts. And it took forever. Yes. But it's this tiny little thing, you know, of like a few different columns, and like a whole encyclopedia set, you know, that kind of goes to what this actually means. So, kudos, Jordan, and I know it's a labor of your to get to real of just 12 and be the version, get them, you know, for the thumb here. Excellent.
I think we may have lost Chad. So let's wait for him to get back for a second here. While he's going on, actually, I'll talk a little bit about one of the things looks like he got bounced. I'll talk a little bit about that chart that I was talking about and some of the stuff that I have on there.
What is going to happen that I'm going to ask, and why would I be calling Jordan in the middle of the night? Because I'm a weirdo. I'll just say that we are staying at a friend's house, and I'll preamble this. They have a Peloton bike. I've been on one before. That's not the first. But if you know Jordan, and as a cyclist, that they have clip-ins. That and I don't know if like every Peloton bike is clip-in only, or if that's an option or whatever. But I sat there, and for the record, I clip my own, you know, without clip-in shoes. But they have clip-in cycling shoes. And Jordan, I sat there like a monkey with that I know what to do. Could not figure out how to get the clip-ins. I couldn't get it in. Well, and it was about 11:30 at night. I had been working on it for and I was gonna call you. I laughed, but I really wanted to, and I eventually figured it out. Not that day, not that night, but the next day. So, and I looked up, but I felt like a big dum dum because you just kick your down way harder than I was doing. That's the answer. Sorry for people listening, probably know that. I will say Peloton bikes. Can I just say? I mean, not on the show. I mean, can I just say that? Like, is that? Do you have one, Jordan? Do you have a Peloton bike?
No, I have my bike.
You just actually just put yours on a stand inside. You have your regular bike.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. When I was a kid, my parents had an exercise bike, and I can't remember the brand. It was 1980s. I swear it was the same thing as this, and it cost a fraction of it. You basically have a little turn dial that increases the resistance. This is the thing that was going wild during the pandemic for people buying, and people pay now like a membership every single month. I turned on one of the videos, Jordan. It was just some lady yelling. I was like, you're not even like, it's not even connected to the resistance. You're not even like controlling the bike. I have to do it. I literally could have sat there like I'm going through the park with, regardless of the thumping party music going on and the person yelling, you can do it. I was like, what are we doing here? Like it's the same bike as when I was 7. So anyway, this is not an anti-Peloton thing, but I just don't get it. I don't get it. Also, it's kind of weird riding it and not like I'd rather be on a hill outside, just riding around as opposed to in a basement. But again, I couldn't clip in the shoes. It took me way too long. I rode it with just socks on that first night for a few minutes, and then I finally figured it. Anyway,
that's funny because when you actually learn how to do it on a bike, you'll fall off a few times. Like when you're actually on a bike that's outside, you'll fall off a few times. So I've done that, and actually, it's really hard. It can be hard sometimes. You can panic about trying to get your foot out of the clip. So if you're trying to get your foot out of the clip to sort of stand up, it can be really tough to sort of get that to land. So I have fallen off doing that as well. So they can be tricky, but it's good that you learned on a station.
I would never be clipped in. I would never be clipped in on a real bike.
It's a lot easier. Like you get feeling very comfortable with it once you've done it a little bit, but you have to fall off like 4 or 5 times to actually, not going fast. You fall off going slow with doing that. Like it's just you just tip over. It's like okay,
right.
So yeah.
It's frightening. I will say I do like the feeling of being clipped in. I feel like you have more power through your strides. When you're pedaling. So I would say that's a big perk of being able to provide energy up and down through the motion. But yeah, like you said, it sounds like it's a labor of love on a real bike to invest that in the long term of saying, I'm going to be a clip-in pedal guy.
Yeah. You got to spare a couple of days of like, this is going to hurt my shoulders because I'm going to fall on asphalt to really get good at it. Yeah.
All right, we got the last point here. I got one quote from the Footballguys Dynasty Forum. And it's an interesting one. Someone from the forum said, I have a theory. People in 3 leagues prefer to have kickers. People in 30 leagues hate kickers. So what are your thoughts on kick defenses when you start building up your portfolio, or if you're in one league? What are your thoughts on the positions?
People in a couple of leagues want to increase the variance, and people in a lot of leagues want to decrease the variance, right? It's not that makes all the sense in the world, right? The people that are playing in a ton of leagues are doing so because they want to sort of, win over the long term. And one of the ways to do that is reduce the variance, reduce the headaches, and by taking out kickers and defenses who perform a lot of times randomly is the way to do that, right? And then you're just sort of running up your edges at your other positions. Guys that are playing it for fun, or folks that are, folks that are playing it for fun, they like the variance, they like the big swings. So that's not surprising at all.
Yeah, and one thing I would add is a lot of times in redraft, that's where kickers are last to go. People are used to defense, used to kickers, and that's the highest variance environment there is. I mean, well, actually, maybe doing a best ball right now with static rosters where you play it out, you draft in February. That's probably the highest variance there possibly is. But redraft with lineups, you get kickers in there, you get defenses, and you want it. And then guess what? Let's give all the money to the winner as well. So let's make it completely high variance in terms of the outcome with 11 non-winners and one absolute take home the whole thing winner. All right. In this episode, we discussed George Pickens for about a half hour. We could have discussed it for even longer. We played 2 rounds of Did I Get Enough for Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen in Dynasty trading. Bijan Robinson was included. We talked about trading for future picks, even if they're going to be on the early side. Good strategy points there. Also, we also mentioned Jordan's analytics of Dynasty, where you go over there and pick up the guide with code FBG. Right, Jordan?
Yep, FBG.
Give us credit. Exactly. Get that nice discount and tell them Football Guys Show sent you. I am Chad Parsons. He is Jordan McNamara. And until next time, good luck in your Dynasty leagues.